Welcome to Hamburgers Horror, the home of meat, monsters, and motorboat accidents. I'm Noah Hook, and today we're looking at 1983's Sleepaway Camp. Released in the heyday of slashers, Sleepaway Camp is mostly remembered for its infamous twist ending, but it is so much more than that. It follows cousins Ricky and Angela, the latter having been in a boating accident that killed her brother and father as they attend Camp Arawak for the summer. It doesn't take long for campers and counselors to start dying gruesomely, and in between baseball and boy fights, the characters try to make it through the summer in one piece. Sleepaway Camp was written and directed by Robert Hiltzik, whose only other directing credit is Return to Sleepaway Camp, the fourth installment of this franchise. Hiltzik became a lawyer and left the movie industry, and it wasn't until years later he realized Sleepaway Camp had garnered a cult following. Filmed on an actual summer camp in New York, the cast is almost entirely comprised of first-time actors, most of them being children. Angela is played by 13-year-old Felissa Rose, who has gone on to star in Nikos the Impaler, Victor Crowley, and Terrifier 2. Her cousin Ricky is played by 17-year-old Jonathan Tiersten, who's gone on to be in The Perfect House, The House That Wept Blood, and Toilet Zombie Baby Strikes Back. Paul is played by Christopher Collette from The Manhattan Project and Prayer of the Roller Boys. And camp owner Mel is played by Mike Kellen from Lonely Hearts and Just Before Dawn in what would sadly be his final role. There are a ton of other great characters, and I'll be sure to mention them as necessary. Sleepaway Camp had a limited release in New York and had a few scattered releases across the US a few months later. It actually ended up grossing $11 million at the box office, blowing its puny $350,000 budget out of the water. It received pretty positive reviews and was often compared to Friday the 13th for its summer camp whodunit kind of plot, but I would say the two are drastically different movies. Modern reviews focus more on Sleepaway Camp's strange little intricacies, some citing it as similar to a John Waters flick. It currently has a 78 and 60% on Rotten Tomatoes, so it seems to still have some love today. The twist ending has become more controversial in recent years, but I'll save all that for after the breakdown. Speaking of, it's probably time we take a look at the movie for ourselves. I hope you brought some shorts, cause we're watching Sleepaway Camp. The movie opens with a long panning shot over the currently closed Camp Arawak as we get a taste of the movie's wonderful, overdramatic score. On the same lake as Arawak and a neighboring summer camp, young Peter and Angela Baker are having some swim time fun with their father John. And these kids are some little schemers. A camp counselor taking some girls water skiing is convinced into letting her steer the boat, which will obviously lead to catastrophe. This guy Lenny tells John that his wife will be there soon, and the distracted boaters veer toward the Baker family. Somehow nobody can move out of the other's way, and the boat goes right over the family. This girl screams her fucking lungs out, and we watch as dead John and a dead child float to the surface, leaving only one little Baker left alive. We jump ahead 8 years later at the home of Aunt Martha Thomas, who is John's sister and that guy Lenny's wife. Here we learn it was Angela who survived the accident, and she lives with Martha and her cousin Ricky. Lenny is dead, don't worry about him. It's, an interesting way to grow up. Ricky and Angela are heading to Camp Arawak for the summer. Ricky has been going for years, but it'll be Angela's first time away from home. Crazy-ass Martha has tied a string around her finger to remind herself to give the kids their physicals.
Just be careful not to tell anyone how you got them. No, I'm afraid that they wouldn't approve of that at all. Even though they know that I am a doctor.
Ricky promises not to tell, and the kids head out to Camp Arawak, home of whimsical music and herds of sprinting children. It's also home to buff counselor Ronnie in his short shorts and cigar-smoking camp owner Mel. Oh god, I almost forgot about the kitchen staff, led by literal pedophile Artie, who is drooling over these poor children. Also, assistant cook Ben is played by Robert Earl Jones, and I have no idea how they got him to be in this. Ricky meets up with his buddy Paul and introduces him to his cousin. Angela, who hasn't spoken a word yet, declines to speak, and Paul tells Ricky his former sweetheart Judy has developed since last summer. Ricky shows Angela around the camp, and he's blown off by Judy, who is talking to the older boys. Angela is in the same cabin as Judy, which is run by counselor Meg. The two are all buddy-buddy, and they don't take a liking to Angela's 1,000-yard stare at Judy's chest. 3 days pass, and Angela hasn't eaten or spoken a word. Ronnie offers to bring her back to the kitchen to find some food, not knowing the disgusting trap it really is. He leaves her alone with Artie, and Ricky learns her location from Meg. Artie brings Angela into the walk-in fridge and is all ready to rape her, but Ricky walks in before he can. He threatens him to keep quiet, and either Mel is completely clueless or is just okay with the kitchen staff having their way with the campers. I'm not really sure. Later that day, Artie and Ben are preparing to boil corn in a humongous pot, but Ben heads out to grab dinner. A first-person POV enters the kitchen and hides until Artie is standing over the boiling pot. The POV pushes him over the pot, and despite Artie's threats and pleas, pulls the chair out from under him. He and the giant pot crash down, and the pedophile is horribly scalded with some great melty skin effects. He also screams for like a whole minute straight, and it's just fantastic. The creep is taken to the hospital, and Mel rushes the doctors out of the camp. He also hushes up Ben and the rest of the kitchen staff with some pay raises, as he doesn't want the kids or their parents to hear about the accident. Sometime later, Ricky tricks a boy named Mozart into sitting up into Paul's butt, and the boys are challenged to a baseball game against the older boys. This baseball montage is literally 3 minutes long, has 2 dissolves, and adds almost nothing to the plot, but I'll be damned if it isn't entertaining.
This guy blows dead dogs, just lay it in there.
Eat shit and die, Ricky!
Eat shit and live, Bill.
The one thing of note here is that Ricky is a bit of a hothead with a smart mouth, and now some of the older dudes have beef with him. They're also having trouble convincing any of the girls to go skinny dipping with them that night, so Kenny and Mike try to convince Angela on a dare. They get the usual Angela treatment, and they start to berate her. Cowboy Ricky steps in and starts a big boy rumble, which ends with Counselor Jean taking Ricky outside to avoid getting in any more trouble. Paul starts chatting up Angela, sharing his remorse for her family and his panty-stealing history with Ricky. But apparently his tales were enchanting enough to get some words out of Angela. This has Judy pissed for no real reason. Billy still hasn't convinced any of the girls to go skinny dipping, so the boys opt to do it themselves. Kenny has gotten high and has convinced this chick Leslie to go canoeing with him, and he decides the best course of action is to scare her and flip the canoe. High-ass Kenny is having lots of fun with echoes when an unseen figure pops up and drowns the wise guy. The boys head back to the cabins to avoid getting caught, and they figure Kenny is just hiding under the canoe to mess with them. The next morning, some pissed-off lifeguard counselor guy finds the beach in shambles, including dead, snake-filled Kenny. Mel is once again trying to convince Ronnie, a cop, and himself that this was simply an accident, but they aren't too sold on the idea. Angela is sitting out of volleyball when Paul slides in to ask her on a movie night date. Angela says yes, but Judy has Meg break them up and give her a scolding. Movie night is over, I guess, and Judy is too fixated on Angela to give Ricky any attention. Paul sneaks in a goodnight kiss, make that 2, and Angela is not into it. He finds the boys getting Mozart with the classic shaving cream feather combo. Mozart pulls a buck knife, Jean takes it, and Paul is attacked by a herd of boys. All seems well with Paul and Angela the next day, aside from Judy constantly harassing them and sicking Meg after them. Meg has just fucking lost it, I guess, but luckily Ronnie is there to stop her. Judy blames Angela for Meg getting in trouble and asks why she doesn't shower with the other girls. She goes on a rant hypothesizing Angela's queerness or that she hasn't started puberty.
She's a real carpenter's dream. The lad is a board and needs a screw.
That is enough for nice counselor Susie to slap the mean girl, and Angela goes to find Ricky. The older boys are having a rooftop water balloon fight and wreck Angela with one, getting the attention of Ricky and Paul. Ricky starts using his colorful vocabulary, and Mel punishes him along with the other boys. A bit later, Billy has to take a wicked dump and doesn't notice as his stall is jammed shut. He does hear a screen being cut behind him, but just assumes it's his buddies pulling a prank, until he sees a beehive coming through the hole. Apparently unable to crawl out from under the stall, Billy screams for help as he is swarmed and eventually killed. This pretty clear murder has caused most of the kids to leave the camp with only about 25 remaining. Mel is convinced there is a killer and is convinced he knows exactly who it is. It's Ricky. Paul is less convinced there's a killer on the loose, and he sneaks off with Angela to the lake. They're frolicking, kissing, tripping, and kissing some more, but Angela starts to disassociate when Paul tries to go for second base. She remembers watching her father and Lenny in bed together and imagines her brother pointing at her childhood self before pushing Paul away and running. While the kids play an exciting game of capture the flag, Paul continues to push his luck with Angela. Angela pieces out, but Judy is willing to show Paul what he's missing out on. Ricky convinces Angela to sneak through the woods with him to help him capture the flag, and they happen upon Paul and Judy sucking faces. Paul chases after Angela, and Ricky and Judy share their mutual hatred for each other. Later that day, Paul tries to apologize, but is once again interrupted by Judy. While Mel tries to subtly probe Ricky's mind, Meg joins in on the Angela harassment and decides she is going in the water today. Mel stops Ricky from intervening and spills his suspicion about him being the murderer. Meg throws Angela in and Ronnie breaks Mel away from Ricky so he can help her. The mean girls have a good laugh, some kids throw sand at Angela, and Ricky promises they'll have their revenge. That night there is a big social, so most of the counselors will be there aside from Eddie, who is taking some little kids camping, and Meg, who has the night off. Meg wants to use her night off to have dinner with Mel, I guess. Ew. The shower line is way too long, so Meg hops over to the empty next door cabin. She's humming away as a knife-wielding shadow enters and the killer stabs her in the back and drags it down through her. The killer even washes off their blade and turns off the water. Paul once again corners Angela to apologize, and she tells him to meet her at the water after the social. Eddie and his younglings make it to the campsite, but it doesn't take long for some of them to get cold and ask to head back inside. He leaves the other sleeping kids, which allows the killer POV to approach them and grab a hatchet. Meanwhile, Mel is looking around for Meg since she missed their date, and Judy is swapping spit with Mike. He hides under the bed when Mel enters the cabin, and Judy points him in the direction of the next door showers. Mike decides to head on out, leaving Judy in a huff. Mel searches the cabin and Meg inexplicably falls out of the shower. Mel is not happy. He promises to Meg's corpse that he'll avenge her and kill Ricky. Judy is curling her hair when who is supposed to be a mystery, but is clearly Ricky in a wig, enters the cabin. The POV knocks her out with a punch and, well, suffocates and rapes her to death with a hot curling iron. Fuck. The killer hides her body under the bed, and Eddie returns to find the kids he left absolutely butchered in their sleeping bags. Eddie throws up some chowder and runs for help. As Ronnie gets word of the child slaying, Mel abducts Ricky and starts straight up pummeling him. Realizing he has possibly beaten the child to death, Mel decides to get out of Dodge, but he isn't able to dodge an arrow shot at him by the unseen killer. Officer Fake Mustache arrives, and the counselors search for Ricky, Paul, Angela, and Judy. Angela meets up with Paul at the beach, and upon her request, they undress to go skinny dipping. Jean and Officer Mustache find a badly beaten Ricky, and another counselor finds Meg. Ronnie and Susie head down to the water where they find what looks like naked Angela caressing Paul's head. Flashback time! Turns out Aunt Martha has always wanted a daughter, and she forced Peter, who was the one who actually survived the crash, to identify as a girl and go by Angela, his dead sister's name. Angela growls and hisses like a monster and drops Paul's severed head. Ronnie and Susie watch in terror as Angela's full penis-having body is unveiled to end the movie. And that's Sleepaway Camp. This movie is absolutely ridiculous, and I mostly mean that in a great way. I love it for its ridiculous dialogue and strange plot points. It's just packed to the brim with character. The acting is obviously amateur, but the dialogue feels so genuine and on the spot that it barely ever feels like they're acting. There are very few movies where you can literally watch children just cuss each other out for like a minute straight. The gore is surprisingly solid for such a low-budget film. Great work by effects artist Ed French. I only recently saw the Billy B prop, and I do wish we could have seen a bit more of it under all those Bs. I'd say it's probably pretty rare for somebody to go into Sleepaway Camp without already knowing the twist ending, but either way I'd say the whodunit plot works pretty well. You know it's probably Angela right from the get-go, but I have learned there's actually a large group of people who think both Angela and Ricky were the killers, and far be it from me to disprove that. Now to address the elephant trunk in the room, the twist ending. There is a lot to unpack with Angela, and it's even tricky to gender the character. To recap, Angela was a boy who was forced to grow up identifying as a girl. The trauma of this, as well as her father and sister's deaths, led to her being a quiet, reclusive child. She also clearly has no issue when it comes to punishing those who have wronged her. It can be inferred that Angela awakening her sexuality as well as grappling with her gender dysphoria directly correlated to her snapping and killing a bunch of people. I'm going to refer to Angela as she/her because that's how she identifies in the sequels, but in the original, Angela really isn't a transgender character. She's just a child that was abused and confused and lashed out. The larger issue is that characters like Angela, Norman Bates, and Buffalo Bill, and their deviation from the traditional gender binary, were depicted as mentally ill or morally corrupt. While none of those characters are actually trans, they are some of the closest things to representations that the trans community has had within horror and film at large, aside from being cruel, laughing jokes. This poor representation is just a part of the long-standing misunderstanding of trans people, cross-dressers, and other members of the LGBTQ community, which has led to widespread fear, which has led to a lot of transphobic legislation and violence. This is all to say that sometimes movies have more impact than writers, directors, or even audiences recognize or intend. I enjoy Sleepaway Camp, Psycho, and Silence of the Lambs, but I can also acknowledge that their views of gender, sexuality, and mental illness are outdated. But it's still okay to love these movies. Sleepaway Camp is a fucking trip, and I think most people would find something to love here. It's a very unique film, all things included. Well, that's about it. Angela's gender and motive become a lot more straightforward in the sequels, which I won't be covering anytime soon. Next week we'll be back on our Halloween marathon with Resurrection. Thank you all for joining me, and an extra thank you to my patrons. As always, I'm Noah Hook, and this has been Hamburgers and Horror. Stay safe out there. Thanks for watching my review of Sleepaway Camp. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to like and subscribe so you can keep up with my weekly horror reviews. And if you want to help support the channel further, be sure to check out my Patreon account. You'll be able to vote for future movies and franchises I cover on the channel. Thanks y'all.